Okay, we're live.
All right, well, good evening. We've got a sparse crowd tonight. Hopefully, a lot of you are watching at home and didn't want to brave the elements tonight. But before we get to our speaker, a couple things I want to do here. I'll let you know about. Number one, we will be doing a creation weekend on February 21st and 22nd at First Baptist Church of Winfield, which is about, I think, 45 minutes north of Chesterfield. And we're looking forward to that one. Also, our friend Dr. Joel Brown, who is now at the Creation Research Society, they are having their national meeting here in St. Louis coming up in July. And I'm going to have Zach talk about that a little bit.
Okay, yeah. So the Creation Research Society is the group that Mark's talking about, the CRS. They hold an annual Creation Research Summit where people submit papers and they discuss their ideas. So it's an academic event. It's not a popular level or apologetics kind of event like we at MAC would typically do. But nonetheless, a lot of if you know anyone in creation science, chances are pretty good they're going to be at the conference. Folks from all the big creation ministries tend to be there to present their latest research. So it's a great opportunity. It's right here in our backyard. It's going to be at Missouri Baptist University. We have a couple of creationist professors now at MBU, and they're helping us to secure that space and put this on. And the dates are July 23rd and 24th. I think I have that right. It's that weekend, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. And the conference, as I said, is an academic event. It's a research event. In the evenings on each of the nights of the conference, there will be a plenary session, which is open to the public. I don't believe you even need to register to attend that. That's actually free. And then the rest of the conference does, of course, have a nominal registration amount. It's a great chance to come and see what creation scientists are actually doing, because there's a lot of work that goes behind the various books and DVDs and museums that we might see. And of course, folks like us can benefit from that as well. So CRS conference, the website is creationresearch.org. That is the CRS website, and you can find the information on the conference there. You can also subscribe to their journal. They have a quarterly scientific publication, which is a peer-reviewed creation journal that they also publish. And I think that's everything to say about that.
Other than they are looking for volunteers. If you're interested, there'll be a sheet on the table up here. You can grab it and check it out. They're going to need some help. We have a board meeting Saturday, and we will be discussing it at our board meeting as well. But I'll have these, we'll just set them right here. Steve, we won't put them in your way. So that is coming up. We just started a 14-week session at the Pillar Foundation, Monday mornings at 9 o'clock. 9 o'clock, right, Scott?
9:30 to 11.
9:30 to 11. Today was the first session, which Scott taught. And so we'll be going for 14 weeks there. It's homeschoolers.
Yeah.
And we usually get, there's what, 7, 8 kids, Scott?
There was like 5 with a couple parents.
Okay.
So.
Yeah. And you're welcome to come. Everyone's welcome. So if you'd like to do that, you're welcome to come. Homeschool Expo, Scott, you got here just in time. So Homeschool Expo is from March 27th to 29th. We will have a booth there again this year as we did last year. So if you are planning to attend that, make sure you come by and see us. Scott, did you want to add anything?
No, I don't think so. I think we don't have any other really details yet. We're going to have that.
All right. We'll be hashing that out at the board meeting Saturday.
Yeah.
Calendars. We had a successful sale on the calendars. I have 4 of them left for sale. They're $15. What's unique about them this year is each month there's an animal featured. This one's the octopus, and there's a QR code. You can zap the QR code and find out everything you ever wanted to know about an octopus. Well, actually, with octopuses, you're never going to find out everything you need to know. But there'll be a presentation about that each month by one of our speakers. So these are $15. There's 4 left.
And Mark will autograph them for you if you buy them tonight.
Which animal would I? The scorpion or the,
Yeah.
probably the anteater. He's the ugliest one. We are also, the next 4 Wednesdays in a row, starting this week, we'll be teaching the youth at Bonham Presbyterian. So that's pretty cool. And then next month, Steve will be coming back again. And Steve, your topic is
Origin of life.
the origin of life next month. So before I introduce Steve, I wanted to play this video, which a friend of mine sent me a couple weeks ago. And I'll kind of let it speak for itself, but he asks a question at the end. And we'll just kind of talk about it for a minute. So
we launched a spacecraft 7 years ago from Earth, a moving platform, towards the asteroid Bennu, a moving target. We arrive there. It does
that's
a
Neil
touch and
deGrasse
go,
Tyson.
grabbing
obviously.
material on that touch. It packs. We launched a spacecraft 7 years ago from Earth. We launched a spacecraft 7 years ago from Earth, a moving platform, towards the asteroid Bennu, a moving target. We arrive there. It does a touch and go, grabbing material on that touch. It packs it into a capsule. That space probe continues. We launched a spacecraft 7 years ago. We launched a spacecraft 7 years ago from Earth, a moving platform, towards the asteroid Bennu, a moving target. We arrive there. It does a touch and go, grabbing material on that touch. It packs it into a capsule. That space probe continues, intersects Earth, deploys the capsule such that on the rotating Earth, it lands within a zone in the Utah desert. And that spacecraft continues on to another asteroid. We did this. We pulled this off. Yet there are people walking among us saying, I don't believe science. I don't trust science. Do you see what it is we do? Do you have any understanding of what this takes?
How about, oops. All right. Orderly. And the only reason science is even possible is God created a universe that obeys the laws of nature. All of that he talked about, which is really impressive. Without an orderly universe, they couldn't do any of that. And that man is a raging atheist. No God needed for any of this. And when my friend sent me that just struck me. Anybody else? Anything else about what he said?
He's conflating observational science, stuff we can repeat to produce things,
Right.
and historical conclusions of data.
Exactly. And that's the other thing that struck me. None of us would disagree with anything he said right there when he was mocking people who don't believe in science. If we can observe it, you can test it, and you can repeat it, of course we believe it. What we don't believe is the conjecture that millions of years ago, the first cell jumped out of a mud puddle, and we're all here as a result of that first cell. So I just thought that was interesting. And Steve, you may want to use that in one of your James Webb Telescope presentations. But at any rate, so tonight our speaker is Steve Grimes. And this presentation is Systems Big and Little, How They Point to Our Creator. So it's about the irreducibly complex systems that surround us and yet defy purely materialist
Isn't it nice when things just work?
Point. Here are the points. And I'll mute again. I don't need that anymore. Muted, I think. So you should be good there. Here's the questions we want to think about. Here's the next 3 minutes is just to think this through. What we just saw. Was anyone responsible for this system? That was a system of things that led to the car rolling off the ramp.
More than one.
Would that be almost unreasonable to think otherwise? There's a reason why in Romans it says these things are self-evident. And that should have been a self-evident example of something that required somebody to put that together. And like you said, more than one. That's the second question. And did we see them? Did you see any guys in white coats or labs or measuring any? You didn't see them though, did you? But we saw the system. We saw the impact, the results of that work. Could this system have self-assembled?
Absolutely.
I mean, if we had all the parts in a Honda factory and wind and all the necessary magnets and all kinds of things, could it have self-assembled? How about if we gave it enough time? What if I said, okay, a million years? How about 1 billion years? Would that self-assemble? And I think the answer again should be self-evident that no, it can't. Well, let's look at it a little more. Do you need to understand what each component was to appreciate the process? Did you really need to understand how lifters are when those lifters were kind of sliding down the hood, or moisture detecting windshield wipers? Do you need to understand how that function, that technology works to recognize, well, it's triggering the next thing in this sequence, and therefore it does what it does. I really couldn't explain it to you, but I can. When that window opened because something touched it, someone designed the window to open automatically when it was touched from the outside or something like that. And so do I need to be able to understand each individual component? Not really. To recognize and appreciate this is a system. I think this speaks to the timelessness of God's handiwork for all ages, all cultures. 4,000 years ago, people that can't write, anyone can look at the stars, anyone can look at creation and see systems. And that's where we're going tonight. I'm not trying to hide it. Did it seem finely tuned?
Absolutely.
Yeah, if we were to spread things out a little more or squish things together, would it have worked? Would the whole thing have failed? Turns out systems, not all systems, but many, many systems, and some of the systems we're going to look at tonight are finely tuned to the molecular level of tuning. And yes, I would say that was a finely tuned system. Would it have worked if one piece was removed? No. Probably not. That system would have failed. Single point of failure would have been, it's not what we would call fault tolerant. Another way to say that is it resilient? I would suggest that system probably was not that resilient. But if we were going to design a system and we want to design a good system, well, we are going to look at single points of failure for fault tolerance and at least go to 2 points of failure. We are going to talk about resilience and different things that we could superimpose and integrate into our design to help with resilience of the system. And again, this would be more evidence of an intelligence having created this. And that was my original slide, and then I kept thinking about, wait, there's more. Does a watch need a watchmaker? These are some of the creationist, evolutionist sort of argument things, but this goes back 2 centuries. I mean, Paley wrote a book with this title. Dawkins tries to respond to exactly this point in his book. I think he fails. I think a watch does need a watchmaker. And I think this system needed a system maker. Here's another thought about this system. Did it interface or interact with other systems? Well, in a sense, you had a series of components, not necessarily related, that did interact with each other. They were integrated with each other. But that's not quite what I'm talking about here. Imagine now we have on this is one floor of the building where they set all that up. Next floor up, there's a similar structure. And at some point, that similar structure will drop a marble through a hole in the floor. And that marble comes through the hole in the floor and hits this system exactly at the right place, exactly at the right time to cause exactly the right thing to happen. That's what I mean by multiple integrating or interacting systems. Mm-hmm. Wouldn't that be further evidence that something really intelligent has brought all this together? And by the way, that's what I'm going to show tonight is a bunch of systems. We're just going to survey just tiny little fraction, but we're going to look at systems, and I'm suggesting these point to a designer, a creator. Was it fast? I think it took 2 minutes. It wasn't that fast. Was it fast enough? Imagine you had a system that did all that, and it came together, and it solved all those prior problems, and it did come together naturally, and it did what it did once every 2 minutes. The trouble is, you needed to do it at, say, once every 2 seconds. You need it 100 times faster. Ugh. How are you going to solve that? How are you going to make that system exactly do what it does, but make it do it 100 times faster? We have systems in biology that are great systems, but their only value is because they operate at speed. And those speeds are remarkable, whether we're talking about the rotational spin of the flagellar motor, or we're talking about different chemical reactions that require catalysts to cause them, in some cases, go 100,000 times faster than they would otherwise go. Catalysts that exist for no other purpose than to speed up an enzyme reaction in some other part of the system. So it wasn't fast, and it didn't deal with speed, but that's another aspect that a functional system might have to also deal with, and in some of the examples we have, we'll have to deal with. Okay, which brings us to today's agenda. That was the introduction, and I know I'm limited about 45. Well, I'll be done by 1:15, I promise. I'll try to wrap it up by 5 after. Is that fair? And questions?
Don't talk so fast I can't understand you.
Okay, well, no guarantees there. Just slow me down. Just slow me down when you need to. But here's our agenda. I want to look at some systems, big systems. Let's just talk about fine tuning of the universe. We hear about that. What does that mean? A little bit of examples of that. Little systems, big and little, good. Integrated, interdependent, layered systems. Because I mentioned imagine now we take all this and now we start doing these kinds of interactions between these complicated systems. That's going to be crazy. And then we get into 2 common topics: irreducible complexity. I only have 1 slide on that. Michael Behe's concept that he introduced in the 90s is very good, very solid, and it relates to all of this. And then if we get time, Kurt Gödel's incompleteness theorems, we'll scratch the surface barely on that, and that'll be the end. Okay, big systems. And I have interjected God's word with this presentation because I think I have to marvel at our creator and our designer throughout this. So, to the Lord your God belong the heavens, even the highest heavens, the earth and everything in it. Oh, time for props. Where'd my props go? Speaking of earth, we're part of a system. You've heard, of course, that the earth tilts on its axis. And so now imagine this is the sun, because I couldn't find anything better to shape.
It's working.
This is a working product. There's your earth there, right? The earth's tilted on its axis. Well, we don't have to imagine this is the sun. That just snuck in there. Not to scale, but let's imagine this is the sun. Now the earth tilted on its axis at one end of its orbit around the earth, the top half is going to be closer to the sun. It's really not the distance to the sun that gives us our seasons. It's the angle of the sun's rays going through our atmosphere and a lot more complicated stuff. But the point is, if you take this earth like this and you put it on the other side, now it's the bottom half is closer to the sun. The angles change. This gives us our seasons. It's a system, remarkable system. Gives us a nice winters that we have with snow and all that stuff if you don't live in the wrong place, I guess. And so we have the winter solstice, and again, that's just the picture of that. Did you all learn that the earth rotates around the what? The sun. Revolves around the sun, sorry. Rotates on its axis and revolves around the sun. Turns out that's not quite true. It revolves around the barycenter, the gravitational barycenter of the solar system. And so here comes our next video, and these are all from secular sources. They're very short. Most of these are less than a minute. Just to give you some examples of what I'm talking about here, and what I want you to start to see is these are pieces of a system that gets more and more remarkable the closer and more we look at it. This is all about the inertial frame of reference. The idea there is if you're sitting in your car and you're going down the highway 60 miles an hour and you drink a cup of coffee, well, that coffee's traveling at 60 miles an hour too. So it's no big deal. But imagine now you're standing on the side of the road, try to take a drink of a cup of coffee that's flying by you at 60. That wouldn't work. Or, So the frame of reference is a factor to all of the physics involved here. We don't need to go belabor that point, but let me unmute and play.
Let's start with the frame of reference of our familiar descriptions of the motion of the planets, one roughly fixed to the sun. One thing is inaccurate about this depiction, and that's the idea that the planets are orbiting the sun while the sun is fixed relative to the planets. The planets tug on the sun just as it tugs on the planets, causing the sun to move. The best reference frame to describe the motions within the solar system is that of the barycenter, the center of mass of all of the objects in the solar system. This is the real point that everything in the solar system is orbiting. From the reference frame of the barycenter, the sun executes this complex pirouette, mostly in response to the outweighted gravitational pulls of Jupiter and Saturn. The solar system's barycenter is sometimes beneath the sun's surface, but when the two giant planets are even vaguely lined up, it can be quite a way outside the sun. So, how does this affect Earth's orbit? The barycenter's motion is slower than Earth's orbit, so this causes Earth's elliptical orbit to just stretch and squish very slightly on the time scale of Jupiter and Saturn's years, 5 and 12 Earth years respectively. And the pull of the other planets also causes the orientation of that ellipse to rotate around the sun over thousands of years. We talked about that effect in detail and its connection to ice ages when we discussed the Milankovitch cycles. So that's Earth's motion within the solar system, complicated, but not as complicated as its motion through the galaxy.
So, and I left the piece in about ice ages. I think it's a reach on the ice age thing, and that's something that we have talks about the flood that can talk about. You need a whole lot of other factors than the Milankovitch cycles to give us an ice age. But I left it in because the timescales here are 5 years, 12 years, 1,000 years. We're not talking about the millions and billions of years because we're looking at observational science and what is occurring all around us with our planetary motions in the solar system. Let's move on. But I do need to call out that this is where we're going. The heavens declare the glory of God. The skies proclaim the work of his hands. Very familiar. Psalm 19. Day after day, they pour forth speech. Night after night, they reveal knowledge. And they have no speech. They use no words. No sound is heard from them. Yet their voice goes out into all the earth. Their words to the end of the world. This is the testimony of Scripture. And let's look at some more examples of how this is occurring. So here's how our solar system, now that's our Earth, and it's part of the 8 or 9 planets, depending on how you count them, in a system. Our sun is also moving. And by the way, this is referred to in Judges 5, verse 20, the stars in their courses. Sun and stars are also moving. It was part of Deborah's song. It's very, it's poetic at that point. But and there's software that you can do to set up your own solar system and tweak the mass of the bodies and tweak their distances and tweak all this stuff. And then you let it run and see how it goes. Tip, if you don't do it just right, the stuff runs for a while and then it crashes into each other, planets collide, things spin off. I mean, you got to do it. You got to get your thing right or it's not going to work. So this is a finely tuned system. Imagine that. Okay, let's look at this notion of how the Earth is moving through. I guess I'll need to mute. No, I don't. I didn't. Thanks. Zach, you solved our whatever it was. So there's the Earth on its tilt, going around the sun. The point is, our sun is moving around the gravitational center of the Milky Way. They're going to conjecture here and extrapolate times and distances. But the point is, what's really happening is movement within larger movement. And I kind of like the way they do this. So what that gives you is these sort of spiral things because, again, the sun is moving around the gravitational center of the Milky Way. That's what they're going to show you here. And obviously extrapolate because the time scales now, to get all the way around the Milky Way, I think it's like 230 million years if we were ever to try to complete that. So this would be the solar system around the gravitational center of the Milky Way. And they're going to show a lot of this going on because this very rotation would be affected by the gravitational pulls of other stars in the Milky Way. And as you enter an arm of the Milky Way, and as you go, so there's going to be other factors, and they conjecture all that out. But that's all of this moving. But let's go back to our solar system for a minute. Let's look at the moons of Jupiter. Now, the moons of Jupiter This is interesting. We could look at any of our planets and seek this kind of stuff. Here's the 4 major moons. Now, I think Jupiter has 80 or 90 moons. It's a lot of moons. Here's just the 4 major ones and a little video of how they're moving. It's pretty cool, and that's some good commentary as well.
The orbital dance of Jupiter's moons is a masterpiece of celestial mechanics. The Galilean moons, in particular, are locked in a delicate balance known as orbital resonance. This means their orbits are interconnected in a way that they exert a regular, periodic gravitational influence on each other. For every orbit Ganymede completes, Europa orbits twice, and Io orbits 4 times.
Interesting.
So, he's referring to the masterpiece of celestial mechanics.
Yeah.
One last thing that I did not know about until I started putting this together. When we look at exoplanets, those planets that are in other places outside of our solar system that we hope will have life on it. When I say we, I mean NASA and the materialists are searching for origin stories so they deny God's word. And they are searching for these exoplanets, which might support first water. Got to have water. They all want water. But then life. Wouldn't we like to find life in these other places? When they look at these exoplanets, they have a bunch of criteria. Is it in the habitable zone around a star of some sort? Trouble is, a lot of these are around red dwarfs. The energy of that star isn't even in the visible light spectrum. More of it's in a more radioactive or harmful spectrum and is damaging to life. There's a problem. But so you got to have the right kind of star with the right kind of distance with the exoplanet. And one of the things they're also adding to this list of stuff that you need is large outer planets like Jupiter and Saturn. Jupiter and Saturn protect the inner planets from collisions, from asteroids and other nasty stuff that would be flying into it. Well, what is part of that? It turns out there's 6,000 asteroids that share Jupiter's orbit. And this video kind of shows this. By the way, if you've been to my James Webb Space Telescope lecture or whatever talk, I talk about the Lagrange points. This is at Lagrange points L4 and L5 if you're curious. Probably won't be, but that's all right. This is less than a minute. So not only you have Jupiter in its orbit, but all of these asteroids, and there's thousands of them, they surround, they follow Jupiter, and again in the L4, L5 Lagrange points, and are part of this system that is our solar system. And we're just discovering this kind of stuff. The more we look in the heavens, and the more things like James Webb and Hubble expose what we're seeing. I just thought this was kind of fascinating. I'd never heard of these before. They're called the Trojan asteroids of Jupiter. And there's literally thousands of them, and we're studying them now, trying to understand them better. But what in my simplistic, probably incorrect layperson's view, I'm thinking, yeah, no wonder that's protecting the inner planets. You can see the inner planets spinning around in the inside because you've got all this stuff that is at least in that same orbital plane as the rest of the solar system. And kind of a neat little diagram. I think this is all part of a system. And so therefore, we want to look at Isaac Newton, who said, this most beautiful system of the sun, planets, and comets could only proceed from this counsel and dominion of an intelligent and powerful being. You know, we live in a wonderful time. You can actually go and get all of these. You can get church fathers, you can get Newton, you can get all these documents from the last 2,000 years. A lot of them are being scanned and archived and put on the web. And if you know where to look, you can find it. And I've seen this quote before, but I said, well, I want to get the real quote from the real book. And you can go get the real book and you can blow up the quote with your tools and so forth. So I think if it's good enough for Isaac Newton to come to that conclusion, I think it's safe for us to come to that conclusion. Let's go on to the next topic. Those are big systems. Fine-tuning. The fine-tuning argument is, and it's pretty much accepted by secular materialists as well. The response is not to deny it anymore. They really can't. The number of factors that are part of this fine-tuning question are so many that instead they're coming up with things like the multiverse. Well, maybe we're just ones of a trillion multiverse of universes, and we just happen to be the one that's right. Dennis Genovese has a nice talk on water. I just thought water has properties that give us what we have here on this planet, which is wonderful, including snow. Does the rain have a father? Who fathers the drops of dew? From whose womb comes the ice? Who gives birth to the frost from the heavens? When the waters become hard as stone, when the surface of the deep is frozen. So here's just a partial list. I pulled up a paper. It's by one of the guys at the Discovery Institute has, I think, done the best paper on it, although there's many. And he lists over 60. I just grabbed, 9 of the 60. We're not going to talk about all these at length. You've probably heard of the argument before. The idea is that if you vary any of these, the strength of gravity, the strength of the strong nuclear force, the strength of the weak nuclear force, if you vary the cosmological constant, things just break down. You don't get carbon bonding, which means you don't get life. All life as we know it is carbon based. All of organic chemistry means there's carbon atoms. That's why it's called organic chemistry. That's what differentiates it. It's got carbon atoms, and yes, it deals with life. But if you can't have certain bonds in those carbon between those carbon atoms, it all breaks down. So all of these things come together to give us this perfect place that we happen to be in to support what we are, and add on to that privileged planet type ideas that we're the ones that can observe it and so forth, study it. We have all the features that our facilities we need to within our to do that, and it's pretty amazing. So that's the fine-tuning argument. It's summarized well by several people. I'm just going to survey Fred Hoyle's very familiar quote, "A common sense." I mean, he was an atheist when he said this. I don't know if he died an atheist. I think he may have, or agnostic. I think he moved a little, but I'm not sure if he moved much. "A common sense interpretation of the facts suggests that a super intellect has monkeyed with physics, as well as with chemistry and biology, and that there are no blind forces worth speaking about in nature. The numbers one calculates from the facts seem to me so overwhelming as to put this conclusion almost beyond question." He was really struggling with a way to explain how everything was just perfectly so, because if you tweak any of it, it stops. The temperature at which water boils is all parts of this. Okay, but I knew we'd need to make tracks, so we're going to make tracks. Little systems. That was just a sample of big systems, and you're familiar with them, and you probably have all of your own in your mind. Oh yeah, that's pretty cool too. Little systems. Does he who fashioned the ear not hear? Does he who formed the eye not see? These aren't the tiniest of systems, but they are small. And this comes from my talk on the wonder of the cell. I use this diagram, and I'll use it again. I'm going to use it again next month when we talk about the origin of life. Turns out the cell is sort of the quanta of life. What is the smallest, really, thing that we can call life? And it's cells. It's pretty much agreed even among the secularists in the origin of life community. There is some debate about what is life. That's part of the problem, is they can't define what life is. But if you get very concrete at all, you end up with cells. This is a life. This is alive, as opposed to things that aren't alive. This thing is remarkably complex in terms of little systems. This is a set of systems within systems. I'm just hearing this past week about in the last 5 years. I've been talking about these little organelles, like the mitochondria and the endoplasmic reticulum and all the lysosome, all these little things that are these little circles and blobs inside the cell, organelles we've been taught since high school. Well, it turns out we've now discovered membraneless organelles. In other words, we have organelles that don't have defined membranes. Sort of like prokaryotes versus eukaryotes. Eukaryotes have a defined nucleus, prokaryotes don't. Well, now we find that there are organelles functioning within cells that don't have defined membranes, so that we haven't seen them. They didn't pop out of this in our early microscopic analysis of cells, but we're seeing them now, and they're studying them now. And so I'll try to come up with a little bit of that next time. The thing is, and the point relative to origin of life, what we are learning about the cell keeps getting more vast at a far faster rate than what we're able to explain about origins of this. And so that's why it's kind of fascinating. But this is kind of an ultimate system within systems. We don't even fully understand it yet. Let's just drill in, though, to one of those regular organelles, the mitochondria, which I've found fascinating for some time now. And we're not going to do much with this, other than maybe you have to take my word for it. I hope not. This is a system. This is the system, of course, that produces the energy molecules that you need for your system. Adenosine triphosphate, ATP. And the way it does it is got this little machinery that goes on and takes ADP, adds a phosphate, ATP comes out. That's way oversimplified. But here's the point. If we look at the structure of this thing, there's an intermembrane space. So you have the membrane of the mitochondria. Let's just do the simple. You have a membrane. And you have a little thing inside of it. Okay, a smaller thing, like a baseball inside a basketball. Okay. here's my challenge for you, because a lot of this is three-dimensional. We make it flat so you can think about it. Imagine I want to maximize the surface of the inner membrane. Well, all of a sudden, I mean, if I forget, let's go back to linear. If I just had a 10-inch circle, well, what if I made that circle like this? Right. Now I'm going to use way more than 10 inches of thread or whatever I'm making the membrane is going to be way more than 10 inches because I wiggled it around. There's a purpose to this organization of the inner membrane of the mitochondria. There's also a reason for the outer membrane to not be like that, because there has to be quite a bit of transport occurring between the rest of the cell, the cytoplasm in the cell, and the other functions of the cell, and the mitochondria itself. But within the mitochondria, the machinery that makes ATP is maximized because we have a lot of mileage, a lot of real estate to implant this little machine called ATP synthase that makes ATP molecules. That's all implanted on that membrane. Okay, well, let's talk about that. Not to try to understand it. Hopefully you can understand a squiggly line is longer than a straight line, right? Because the shortest distance between 2 points, right? Anyway, so we look at that membrane, that inner membrane of the mitochondria, and we find this is and I got big words here, sorry. Oxidative photophosphorylation. That's a big word. The key point there is a phosphorylation. It uses oxygen as an input, goes through some steps. We'll just call each of these blobs a step, and it ends up with that ATP synthase that gives us ATP, the molecule that we need for life. Without it, you're dead very quickly. Okay, there's some steps. I want you to think about the diagram, the video we saw, right? We saw a video where this kind of tricked that, which kind of tricked that, which kind of tricked. This is similar. We basically have molecules being passed from stage to stage, and this is tuned so remarkably well. With some of these distances are within the number of hydrogen atoms. If you change just within the width of a single hydrogen atom change will cause it to break. That's how precise this is tuned. But let's get a little better picture of it. There's closer to what we understand about it now. It's not just 4 blobs leading up to the ATP synthase. The ATP synthase, usually that's where my old wonder of the cell talk stopped. I just talked about that, and somebody said, well, where did the proton gradient come from? I think it was Will. That's a good question. Let me go look at that. Well, this is where it comes from. It comes from this process, this phosphorylation process that basically creates the proton gradient on one side of the membrane that is used to power the ATP synthase. Now, all the stuff that's going on here is just remarkable and beyond the scope of course, of any little survey meeting. All I want you to talk, what I really want you to appreciate here is, can we not see this as a system? Mm-hmm. And what kind of conclusions should we draw from this complex of a system? Can we draw no conclusions? Can we, at some point, I think evolutionists must throw their hands up. There are evolutionary just so stories and explanations. I shouldn't even call them explanations. They're just stories without any lab or supporting work to prove them about maybe how mitochondria came to be by one cell absorbing a bacterial cell, and that interior thing be turned into an organelle, and over time it became useful to the larger host cell. And, step by step, the steps are not there. The steps are like that former picture. Here's the evolutionary description of some of these things, some of these processes. And yet when we really get into any of these processes, we learn they look more like this. And there's hundreds of maybe thousands of reasons that explanation falls apart. But it's the scientists that have to argue this stuff. So you get your Michael Behes, people like that, and Michael Denton that understand some of this, and they start to make these points. Well, the first thing you do is they won't publish anything they say in Science and in Nature. What they'll do is publish the responses to Michael Behe. And I saw this in the debate once between some ID guys and some seculars. And I forget the ID guy who stood up and said, I open Science and I see the latest response to Michael Behe. And I never see an article from Michael Behe in Science. Why don't you let him publish his side and then you respond to it? Wouldn't that be good science? You go back and forth, show him wrong, but let him post both sides. No, they won't even post his letters to Science. David Menton, a former president of MAC, had this problem. He wrote Science, they had made a mistake, and he wrote about it, but because of his craziness, they wouldn't publish his letter, even though he was factually correct. Not all of this stuff has to be arguable. Sometimes you're just talking about how this stuff works. Anyway, that process occurs one way in animals. It uses oxygen, that oxidative word. In animals, it uses oxygen as an input to the system. Plants use photon energy as an input to the system. And therefore, their process looks a little different. Again, we'll go back to a simplified thing. It still ends up with ATP synthase. We still end up with that little motor at the end that's creating those ATP molecules to keep the cells alive, keep us alive. The point is, you see light coming in here and light coming in there. Byproduct of this is oxygen. Well, isn't that nice for the planet? The byproduct of ours and a lot of other surrounding functionalities and systems is carbon dioxide. There's a balance, and there's, again, a system. So I think we'll just get past this one. This is just further detail on the oxidative, or not the oxidative, rather the photophosphorylation. But those are little systems. And we could spend, well, my Wonder of the Cell talk spends all the time there. Let's go on to integrated, independent, layered systems. Am I doing okay, Marv? Too many big words?
You take all the time you want.
Okay. Trying
You
to.
already blew my mind.
Okay. Well, it should, like that first. I mean, I couldn't set that up, and I can appreciate, though, that somebody did. That's really my point here. We should walk away from this knowing this demonstrates someone's handiwork. And I think we all in this room probably know who that is, or at least we've got a good idea, but I give you clues anyway. I praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Wonderful are your works. My soul knows it very well. My frame was not hidden from you when I was being made in secret, intricately woven in the depths of the earth. This was the psalmist writing about the human body. And this is the original idea for this came from your track, Marv. Marv's track lists 10 or 13 systems of the human body. These are great. This is a wonderful example of integrated, interdependent systems. What good is your circulatory system without your respiratory system? I mean, you really do need all of these systems now interacting with each other. All are doing their amazing thing, but they're doing it in correlation with other systems, completely independent, but also completely tightly integrated systems. And I think it's a great example. And so, yes, systems of the human body. This is where I would hand the track out if I remember to bring it. It wasn't in my prop bag, sorry. But we can get it. It'll be here next time. The various systems of the human body, and this is just a partial list. Really, some people break this down into far more, like the excretory system. Well, there's way more to it than that, but that just I'll summarize it there. The nervous system, there's several layers to the autonomic nervous system. There's different aspects. Just called the nervous system for here, endocrine system, skeletal system, and so forth, with some definitions. Here's what I like, and I'm going to go back to God's word here. A quote that I don't know if it's in your tract or not, Mark, but his tracts are small. They can only get so much. This is from the book of 1 Corinthians that Paul wrote. Even so, the body is not made up of one part, but of many. Yeah, that's right. We were talking about that. Now, if the foot should say, because I am not a hand, I do not belong to the body, it would not for that reason stop being part of the body. By the way, I think this speaks to the trans issue. But anyway. And if the ear should say, because I am not an eye, I do not belong to the body, it would not for that reason stop being part of the body. If the whole body were an eye, where would the sense of hearing be? If the whole body were an ear, where would the sense of smell be? And here's the piece I wanted you to see. But in fact, God has placed the parts in the body, every one of them just as he wanted them to be. That's where this all came from, and that's why we have what we have put together the way we have it put together. So probably one of the classic examples that's used by creationists is the eye. And of course, this is Richard Dawkins attacks this, and he wasn't the first. He actually adapted some of his work from another author. I forget the other author's name. But he complains about the eye. What's he going to complain about? Well, there's a whole lot to this system. And I was fortunate to see Dave Menton's talk on the eye. It was a meeting like this, and it was, Paul, you may have been there. Remember when Dave did that? It was great. He was an anatomist. That was his day job, so he knew quite a bit about this stuff. Anyway, we're just going to focus on one little part of the eye just for a minute. And you see all these things that are labeled, right? That little red line that's kind of on the perimeter there, that's the retina. And I don't know if you can see it. I can't see it on the TV, but that's what I put the arrows in, so you can not mistake it. Let's just look at that little piece of this system. There's that piece. Wow. A bunch of gobbledygook, not quite. Looks kind of organized, doesn't it? Looks kind of layered, like a cake. Looks like it might have some kind of purpose there. Yeah. Okay, so the point that Dawkins and the evolutionists like to make is this is poor design. They call this the dysteleological argument. The argument from poor design. This is, no creator would have put it this way. No creator, no designer would have put the light sensitive cells at the bottom of this stack of goo, because that would make them less efficient. You'd put the light sensitive cells, the light comes in from the top. See the very light says the word light? The light comes in from the top. So why would the light sensitive cells be at the bottom? Duh. There's your evolutionist making his point, makes this to college kids, and just kind of breaks my heart because kids don't, oh, yeah, it's dumb. I guess there's no creator. My goodness. It's because he just doesn't understand the eye. And he's had secular people come after him for this that said, wait a second, you are so misrepresenting what we've really got here. And we couldn't scratch the surface of all this, but we'll just scratch it. We won't go much further than that. The reason you have the light sensitive cones and rods, you've heard those terms, those cells are at the bottom because they're the most closely situated with this kind of red band of stuff here. Looks like it might have little blobs of things in it. Those are the red blood cells. Those are hemoglobin. That's called the RPE, the retinal pigmented epithelium. That carries the blood supply to your retina. The retina is the second most metabolically active cells in your body. The brain is the most active. Second is the retina. That the turnover rate of what you need there to support that high metabolic, the turnover in terms of taking away waste products and delivering fresh oxygen, fresh nutrients, keeping fresh blood. Imagine you've seen a flash camera go off in your face before, and what happens? Everything kind of turns white for a second, right? But then within seconds, you can see again. Nice gift. What's happening there is your retinas have all been blown out, but they quickly recover. They recover because that high metabolic rate is occurring, and this blood supply supports that. So job one is to give them all the nutrients and oxygen they need to support that high metabolic rate. That's job one. And that's why Richard Dawkins' eye, this is why the eagle eye is the same way. In fact, all the animal kingdom eyes, with the exception of one or two oddballs, because then God likes to throw things like platypuses at us from time to time. Only one or two animals don't have it organized this way. The eagle that can read the date on a dime at 100 yards, the eagle has the same arrangement in terms of the layers above it, and then the rods and cones being down at the bottom next to the RPE. There's more, but wait, there's more. So this is what we knew at the time this article came out, and this diagram I got the article from. Now they found these, I think they're called Mueller glial cells. They act like fiber optic channels. They transcend from the top of this layer down to the rods and cones. Imagine that. They serve to focus light down to this layer. They transcend these other layers. And we don't, the last paper I read, we were still studying them. Now we've probably figured it out by now because it probably was 5 or 10 years ago. But the point being, there are optimizations in this structure to support getting light at the top to these cells that need it to give us our vision, color and black and white and all that, is part of this system that we didn't even see when we understood this much about it. So when you get a guy like Dawkins that comes along and says, oh, this is a poor design, it's just it's so much bluster and ignorance on display. It'd be like walking into, the World Trade Center and saying, yeah, you don't need this column here. Just those columns, they're just blocking my view. Get rid of these columns that are holding up the roof. That's just no good. You don't need that. I mean, maybe you do need those columns. And it would be nice to see a little humility on the part of these evolutionists that point this out. He does this with the recurrent laryngeal nerve. He does this with several features in the body that all have function, purpose, and are well designed when you follow the whole embryological development cycle to how we got to where we are. Had to grow from a single cell, recall that, and to fully grown adults that live for, with health, 60, 80, 70, 80 years, as the scripture says. Anyway, I'm going to keep moving. That was the part that ties to your track, though, Marv. Thanks for the track. Good stuff. This one, and every time I open this talk, I just take out some systems and I put in other systems. This is called the Wood Wide Web. I'd never heard of this until about 6 months ago. This features Calvin Smith out of Canada's Answers Genesis. About 3 minutes.
In a nutshell, pun intended, the Wood Wide Web is a network that connects trees in such a way that they can share food, information, and even formulate specific plans to accommodate various conditions and even specific events that occur throughout their region. So what exactly connects and allows communication and cargo to travel between individual trees over an
Not very
immense
loud.
area? Surprisingly, it's primarily the filaments, called hyphae, that flow from a wide variety of mere mushrooms that send their tendrils, mycelium, throughout the soil and attach and surround tree roots, fusing these branching nodes into a massive communication network called the mycorrhizal network. It's hard not to notice the similarity to the decision-making ability that our current AI programs have, in comparison to what the mycelia network readily displays in the statements and conclusions expressed by researchers studying the Wood Wide Web. For example, in a Science Direct article discussing the concept of mycelial consciousness, the abstract states, fungal mycelia show decision-making and alter their developmental patterns in response to interactions with other organisms. Mycelia may even be capable of spatial recognition and learning, coupled with a facility for short-term memory. Based on the fact that hyphae and mycelia show decision-making capabilities and exhibit spatial recognition, they conclude these abilities are expressions of cellular consciousness, learning, and short-term memory, which is truly mind-blowing to consider when talking about an organism you typically chop up with butter and onions to garnish your dinner plate. Tolkien's intriguing idea of ancient tree shepherds overseeing the health of their forest community is now known to be amazingly accurate, as scientists have discovered that the largest and oldest trees in an area, named mothers, act as hubs in their community, actually nurturing their offspring directly by devoting extra resources to them throughout the network when needed. In fact, these trees with the most tree rings become the ringleaders in their areas. For example, should a small sapling growing in the shade of the surrounding taller trees be struggling from the effects of lack of sunshine, the lack of nutrients typically gained from photosynthesis, its mother will feed it more through the network in order for it to grow and eventually reach a height where it can receive regular sunlight. However, the interconnected cooperation observed through the Wood Wide Web has been demonstrated to far exceed a simple mechanism for individual species to better reproduce. Researchers have discovered cooperation between species, such as how extra nutrients will be provided to shorter evergreen trees that often end up in shaded environments in summer by the taller trees, as the deciduous trees are in full leaf. But that the favor is then reciprocated in the wintertime by the evergreens back to their now leafless neighbors, who can't produce as much during that time.
Wow.
Kind of amazing. That's a system. Here's another one. Last part, about 2.5 minutes.
Studies have also shown that trees can send detailed warnings to those around them via chemical messages sent through the network. For example, a tree attacked by insects may sound the alarm to trees nearby, which will then activate specific enzymes to ward off that type of insect, should the insects attempt to spread towards them. And some even send messages through the air by emitting puffs of ethylene gas in response to animals, like giraffes, for example, that have approached to eat their leaves. Studies have shown that trees that are targeted by such herbivores will not only activate defense processes to make their leaves taste bad by accumulating increased amounts of tannins in their leaves, but will also warn other trees nearby via this airborne messaging to do the same, as if in anticipation of the long-necked leaf eaters visiting and munching on them as well. This, of course, results in trees not being completely devastated in one shot by animals camping out and deciding to use them as a all-you-can-eat buffet, by encouraging creatures to spread out their grazing over wider areas. Of course, the fact that trees have the ability to change the taste of their leaves, especially that quickly, and somehow know that it will be distasteful to the herbivore and therefore benefit the trees, is mind-boggling as well. Although they don't have our 5 senses exactly, they somehow must have a monitoring and sensory system that recognizes when they're being eaten, which then activates a normally inactive program that sends out a warning and causes a chemical change inside the leaves. and then, once the danger has passed, switches them back once the threat is gone. I would say such incredible discoveries are truly a testament to our incredible Creator, as Romans 1:20 reminds us. For his invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world in the things that have been made, so that they are without excuse.
Familiar verse to many of us?
Steve, that's
Yes, sir.
on the CMI website?
That is, and I put the links in here. It is on their channel. They have their own channel, I believe, called Answer in Genesis Canada.
Got it.
YouTube. Yeah. He's doing some good stuff up there.
Yeah.
I must say. Better communicator than I am, but I like to, if you didn't get anything I said, hopefully he made sense. Irreducible complexity. Our second to last topic, and it won't be too long here, about out of time. Does the hawk take flight by your wisdom and spread its wings toward the south? Does the eagle soar at your command and build its nest on high? You know, we have Michael Behe in his book, Darwin's Black Box, described the mousetrap as an irreducibly complex system. And there's an evolutionist that have tried to write and propose step-by-step processes that could give us, and it gets just crazy, I think. Because I think his example is very good. That's a very good way to communicate the concept. If you take any piece away here, it may function, but it won't function as a mousetrap. And the point of irreducible complexity isn't that things don't have function apart from the mousetrap. Springs have function, pieces of wood have function, but as a mousetrap, they don't have function. And you have to be careful when the debate rages. The evolutionist tries to slip in, well, the smaller piece also has a function, and the smaller piece, well, at that point, everything you go down to the molecules, all the molecules have a function as part of some system of something greater. The point is the organization of those things into a functional system is not explained by any natural, undirected, long age process that we have yet to discover. And so, therefore, he argues that he's a long ager too. He's an intelligent design person. As far as I know, he's not a young earth creationist. We have many examples of this. One comes from Scott, from the zoo stuff we do. The bristle-thighed curlew. Mm-hmm. This is one of these crazy birds up there that's in Alaska. The mom and dad bird, they hatch these babies and they give them some food and then they take off. They leave the babies to raise themselves for another couple of weeks, putting on weight or eating more food. And then the babies take off. They don't just take off. They take off over the ocean for thousands of miles to some destinations like 5,000 miles away. These migration patterns, it's hard to see a gradual process. Well, I made it 10 miles this time. The next generation will make it 20. No, how do you give these gradual step-by-step incremental process to get you a bird that comes out of the egg, eats, and takes off and flies 5,000 miles? There's no islands, there's no halfway stopping points. It's just flying. And in some cases, some of these bird migrations, they've studied and realized they do not have enough stored food energy to make the trip. Well, that seems like, okay, done, right? You don't have enough food. You don't have enough energy to make the trip. No, they make up for it by patterns, flying patterns like the V's and you see the geese in and stuff. That saves them just a shred of energy. There's a neat article, I forget if it might be on creation.com. They try to do this with jets. Oh, this is great. God, it's biomimicry. Let's copy this and let's fly jets in the same pattern. It'll save gas. And actually, you use more gas than when jets fly in the pattern like geese do. Why is that? Well, it turns out the vortexes coming off jet engines is entirely different than the vortexes that come off of wings flapping. And it works for birds, but it doesn't work for jets. And in birds, it saves a little bit of energy over these long distance flights. I think these are great examples of irreducible complexity. And so I just threw them out there. Now we've even studied, how do they know though? Okay, I got everything I need to make this flight, but a little to the left, a little to the right, a 1% deviation at the end of 1,000 miles, you're 100 miles from where you needed to be. Where are you going to land? You're over the water. Turns out we think the bird can actually see the magnetic field of the earth. And that's what all this is about. And it gets back to chemistry. There's actually molecules involved in the bird's eyes and brain that orient certain ways and react certain ways as they're moving along relative to the magnetic field of the earth. I think it's just remarkable. Another remarkable example of a system. Every bit as remarkable as the lifters that slid down the hood and just bumped the next piece to make something happen. These are remarkable things, which brings me to my closing point, which won't take long because we're not going to spend much time with it. Kurt Gödel's incompleteness theorem. So he had two, and it's a fascinating piece of American history. Kurt Gödel, he was at the Institute for Advanced Studies at Princeton, and I've read the book. I'm on the second time through. It's a hard book to understand. Rebecca Goldstein, who's an evolutionist materialist, apparently. She does ask one point, and I haven't found the quote in the book. I'll put it in this when I get there. She goes, "How can this be true since we know evolution is how we all got here?" But the point is, the implications of this are what's important. First, let's talk about the theory. Any consistent formal system F, and he started with mathematics, but this has implications outside of mathematics. Evolutionists deny that. If you go to the Wikipedia page now, they'll say, well, it's a math logic thing. No, it has huge implications. He understood that, and it's in his papers that he understood the implications of this. But within mathematics, any consistent formal system F, within which a certain amount of elementary arithmetic can be carried out, is incomplete. I.e., in other words, there are statements of the language of F which can be neither proved nor disproved within F. The point is, if you have a system with geometry, algebra, you cannot prove everything about that system. You have to have a reference to some external thing to explain what's happening in that system. Here's why that's important. It's faith. You have to have faith. You have to accept by faith some external axiom or postulate to say that my system is consistent. Now, if you're willing to give up on consistency, this is part of what he proves in the papers. I tried to read his paper. I got about to the third sentence, and it's like, it's tough. The first sentence, I got it. Second sentence, third sentence, I'm losing it. It's amazing. But his point is that you can give up on consistency. You can give up on formality. Those both have fixed meanings within mathematics and logic. But if you stick to the definition of what is formal and consistent, you cannot prove that system without relying on something outside that system. And it just doesn't apply to math. It applies to all systems of belief, thought, philosophy, and whatever. So the point is, we are dependent creatures, and this is one way that I look at it. And we need a reference point. And no matter how smart you are, you're going to have at least one reference point that is outside of what you can prove and know and feel and whatever. You're going to have that external reference point that is, I think, what his incompleteness theorems speak to. The first theorem is a contingent statement. The second theorem says, therefore, all systems are basically falling into this. For any formal, by the way, I did reword it just to maybe help it. For any formally consistent system built on axioms and rules of inference, propositions will exist that are unprovable within that system. Because I kept trying to find an easily worded way of saying it. That's how I ended up saying it, for what it's worth. Okay, so conclusions. We live in a world of complex, overlapping, integrated, optimized, resilient systems, and we need to draw some conclusions here. And I think this is the conclusion. For this is what the Lord says: He who created the heavens, he is God. He who fashioned and made the earth, he founded it. He did not create it to be empty, but formed it to be inhabited. He says, I am the Lord, and there is no other. And that is the end. Thank you.
My son is an architect, and he was talking about when he was a student, he would go into a building and say, this is the stupidest design I've ever seen. Why is that there? And why is that there? And he said he came to realize that it depends on, number one, the priority of the creator, or whoever was having the building built. He had priorities, and whatever those priorities were affected everything else. So when you look at something like the eye, and Richard Dawkins saying, this is terrible design, it's so complex to begin with, but when you do one thing, when God designs one thing, it could have affected something else. So the design is what it is. It works perfectly. It functions wonderfully. It's
And where it doesn't, I think there's two responses to that. One is there's a fallen world, and so we are looking at a corruption of God's perfect design. Okay, well, we make allowance for that as Bible-believing Christians. But the second part is, or that I'll respond with is, well, okay, make a better one.
Yep.
Design a better one. Show me a better one. So you know that so much. Yeah, you do an eye. Let's see your eye. And that usually stops them because
Yeah, exactly, right? As soon as you can build a better one, then you can say that's a bad one, right?
Right.
But until then, you've got nothing to say, right?
And then the priorities comes into it too. Yes, our eyes cannot see as far as eagles, but we're not swooping down from 500 feet to catch a mouse.
I don't know. Sometimes in business, I feel like somebody's swooping down. No, that's an excellent point.
And despite the deficiencies with our eyes, we have taken over and commanded all of the animal kind. So our eyes may not be as good as others.
They're plenty good for
It's
what we
fit the
need.
need.
Yeah. Right. Anybody else have questions for Steve?
Well, I got a comment from your very first thing.
Yeah.
The thing that captured me is you make I'm noticing these things, right? And I'm a mechanical engineer as that I am, right? And you're right. You've got lifters in there, and you've got a muffler in there, and it's just like, and it's rolling, and it's just like, but all those things are pieces of a car. They're not operating in really what they were designed to really be.
True.
And yet you've got all these pieces that are part of a system that you're talking about, but it wouldn't get you anywhere. You know what I'm saying? Take it to the gas station and fill it up and say, it's not all together in the right place until the very end, where all those same pieces are put together.
Right.
In, once again, for a purpose. There was a purpose to all those other pieces, was just to do this, but it got you nowhere except for doing this. And then at the very end, oh no, all those pieces really go together like this, and that'll get you there.
Yeah,
That's
two thoughts too.
I was going to say that commercial was actually, I looked at Scott and said they did that for a Super Bowl.
Yeah.
So anyway, go ahead.
So one is, I was going to say, when you start, I was going to say, yeah, all analogies break down, and they do this, but this is not too, and you just made me think, it's actually not that far from what the evolutionists are doing. Okay, you get this muffler rolling, and they're saying, see, there's a muffler doing something. If you look at the bacterial flagellar motor that he writes about in Darwin's Black Box, he points out the evolutionist response to that is, well, there's a subsystem there called the type 3 secretory system, TPS3, and that thing exists for another purpose in bacteria, and that it was absorbed into this motor and became part of the larger system now, and it wasn't originally intended for motility, but now it's part of a system that functions as a motility. There's a number of problems with that, one being that we're explaining something that has motility. In that case, we're explaining how to make that little ramp change to get, and was that an efficient system? No, obviously, could have just stood there and done this. But these other components do have, sub-function does not explain the larger system, is I think the point. Your point is it's all part of a car that's a larger system and has to all fit together perfectly. Even more than that is a good one. But my point is, motility is the role of the bacterial flagellar motor and the whip and all that stuff, and not the secretory system. That's a part of the problem. Second problem is that type 3 secretory system in evolutionary timeframes came later. It's actually it belongs to bacteria that use it to inject like bubonic plague into animals. So it was much later in the evolution of bacteria that TTS3 even came into existence to do what it does. Even if it were part of the bacterial flagellar motor, that's in the earliest and youngest and simplest bacteria. That was at the very beginning. So you've got, a better argument would be to say it broke out and became that other thing, not that that other thing became part of this working system. So anyway, but
good point.
Yeah, those are the things that get discussed.
Well, as usual, Steve, that was enlightening. I learned a whole bunch, and I have a headache.
I'm good for a headache.
So any other questions or comments?
I
Well,
agree.
thank you all for coming on this cold and snowy evening, and those of you who joined us online. If you do have questions, you can send them to Missouri Creation. If you go to the website, missouricreation.com, you can email us and we'll forward that to Steve. I won't even attempt to answer it. So we'll forward that to Steve. And if you are interested in volunteering at the Creation Research Society event this summer, you can email us through the website as well. And with that, we'll close with a word of prayer.
Very good.
Lord God Almighty, thank you for opening our eyes, Lord.
Mm.
Thank you for this wondrous creation with so many elements and so many things. Every living thing that you created is dependent on other things that you created, and it all works together. We're in awe of you, Lord. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Amen. So if you're interested in learning, the flyers are up here.
Very good, sir.
Amazing stuff.
Yeah. Sorry, I forgot to bring your track.
Well, if nothing else in my life,
Right.
I that tract
Yeah.
got your mind.